Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's 1:30, so I'm going to get us started, knowing that folks will probably continue to join us over the next couple minutes. It's so nice to see all your names. I'm just going to pull up our PowerPoint shortly, but I just want to welcome you all and thank you for joining us. This will be the first of a series of webinars leading up to the Type 2 Diabetes Dialogue event that will take place this fall. And I'm just going to try to share. We're going to start off with some technical bumps already. Anyway, so I'll just continue. So today's session will be on Type 2 diabetes and Indigenous peoples, supporting a culturally safe and self-determined journey. Thank you, Shauna, for getting us going. So I would like to just begin by, I guess I'm going to wait for the slides to come up. Sorry, we're off to a little bit of a bumpy start. But I guess I'll start with my territorial acknowledgement. So I'm based out of Kelowna. I want to acknowledge how grateful I am and express my gratitude and acknowledge that I live, work, and play on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Syilx Nation. In my slideshow, I had a picture of my hometown here, but I'm going to try to do this actually. I'm so sorry about this, but I just want to express my gratitude for Kelowna. I live near kind of the beaches in Kelowna, so as you guys all probably know, it's a busy place in the summer, but I'm just so grateful that I get to call this place home and enjoy. It was a picture of a sunset, and I've enjoyed probably hundreds of sunsets, and on my journey of cultural safety, I've definitely sat at that beach and reflected about how grateful I am that I could call this place home and enjoy sunsets there with my family and watch my daughter play in the sand and water. So definitely grateful for this beautiful place that I live. In terms of agenda, I'm going to try, there we go. So thank you so much for bearing with us. I'm sure everyone's in the same boat of this virtual world, but we will get started. All right, so there's the beach I was talking about. So with that, I will introduce myself. My name is Ramin Bowerbank. I am a leader of health system improvement with the BC Patient Safety and Quality Council. I'm going to be facilitating this session. I'm hoping it won't be as bumpy as that last 2 minutes, but alongside me is Shauna Nickel. She's our project coordinator, and she's kind of making it all happen in the background. She will be tech support as well as anything else that comes up. You could pop it into the chat and she will be there to help you. So agenda for today, we're going to try to keep it short because I know how excited I am for today's presentation. So we'll try to get right to that. We do have a few housekeeping items to get through just around Zoom. A lot of you have probably, Zoom is all of our lives right now, so you might be familiar with them, but we'll just kind of do a quick run through of those and get right into the presentation. We'll wrap up with a Q&A session at the end of the presentation and then do a couple of wrap-ups around evaluation and things like that, and then sign off. So before we kind of get started, I do want to kind of set some expectations and I guess just some ground rules for the next 60 minutes to make this a really positive experience for everyone. We have quite a few folks on the line, so I'm not going to read through these, but maybe just give you guys 15 seconds or so to just have a quick look. Perfect. Okay, so Zoom tools. I'll make this pretty easy. If you guys have any questions, you could pop them into the chat. So we're going to start there. The chat box, it should appear in the bottom right-hand side of your screen. If it's not there, you can find it at the bottom. Oops, sorry. moved ahead. You can find it at the bottom of your screen, kind of in the middle. You can use that to say hello, connect with other participants. You can also pop any questions you have in there during the presentation. We will have that Q&A portion where we kind of look at questions in the chat. For those of you, I think there's a few that are connected via telephone only, not Zoom. You can feel free to send your questions to diabetes@bcpsqc.ca, and we will be checking that inbox and pull in those questions as well. So right now, by default, everyone is muted just because of the volume of participants we have. If you would like to verbally ask a question, please feel free to raise your hand. And the way you raise your hand is you click participant. So that's also at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, you should be able to put your hand up. This is in the event that we have quite a few people who want to speak up, and we'll call your name out, and then you can unmute your line and ask your question. Kind of like school, but that's just a good way to manage all the questions that we may have come up. Okay, and this is my favorite one, and I think a cool feature of Zoom is the ability to write on the screen. So your name is not tied to whatever you put on the screen. It's a great kind of brainstorming and sharing information tool. So the way that we do this, so at the top of your screen, you should see that it says you are viewing Raman's screen, and then you can click view options. Some of you are advanced, I see. So once you click view options, then you'll see a drop-down menu appear, and you select annotate. From the annotate menu, you should get this text box appear, or this bar appear, and the second from the left is the text tool. There's also a formatting tool, so you can change the size and color and a few other features of your text if you would like. I see we have some advanced people here, so that's awesome. We're going to get to practice. So in this next slide, I would love to hear what your favorite summer activity is. So again, view options at the top, then select annotate, and then you select the capital T, the text tool, and put your, oh, hiking, swimming. Swimming, camping. Yes, well, I can move some of these around. That is awesome. Yes, I agree with all of these, mountain biking, reading, gardening. Yeah, it's a good reminder that we are, you know, midweek, mid-August in the summer of a crazy year. So good for us to all be doing all these things. Awesome. And I'm so excited. We have so many advanced Zoomers here because, yeah, the stamp option we're going to talk about next. I'm just going to let eating, taking picnics, potholes, walks at the beach, calling bull moose. This is, yeah, we have to save this. Okay. Okay, awesome. We're going to move on to the next slide, which is around stamps. So I go next and clear. Thank you for that. So stamps. Yeah, you guys have already figured it out. So a couple down from the text tool, it's stamp. Pick your favorite stamp, and we're going to practice with this one as well. I would love to know, so I'm going to clear, and then I would love to know which one of these images reflects how you're feeling coming into today's session. So like I said, we're middle of the week, middle of August. How's everyone feeling? I love it. We have such a good mix. A lot of very mellow people, some people really enjoying the flowers and sunshine, and then some people, yeah, it's a stressful time as well. So thank you for that. Thanks for sharing that. Okay. We're going to keep going. And then this is kind of my last exercise to really get to know how we're doing in the energy in here, is where are you joining us from today? So I don't have cities on here, so you're going to have to know your geography. Awesome. Awesome. Mostly down here, but we have a few folks up north. That's great. Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, we got a good sense of who we have in the room. Let's keep going. And with that, I know what you guys are all here for. I'm super excited. Over the last couple of weeks, I've gotten the opportunity to meet with Rebecca and Jessica and plan for today's session. And I feel so fortunate to build those relationships. And they are such inspiring, passionate, and strong women. And I think more than anyone, I'm so excited for today's presentation and just to hear and listen to what they have to share. So without further ado, I will introduce Rebecca and Jessica. So Rebecca Sovdi is a senior policy analyst and is a clinical practice consultant for diabetes with the First Nations Health Authority. She has 13 years of experience working in Indigenous health in the areas of health and wellness promotion and chronic disease. Jessica Guss is a manager of cultural safety and humility with the First Nations Health Authority. She has over 20 years experience in business administration, including 6 years of working in Indigenous health and wellness. We are so honored to have you both here, and I will pass it over to you, Rebecca and Jessica.
Okay, thank you so much. Hopefully you can hear me okay, and we got the kinks out through Raman's presentation. So thanks so much for the introduction. First and foremost, I'm going to pass things over to Jessica to start us out with a territory acknowledgement.
Great, thank you. Hello, everybody. I would like to open our gathering by acknowledging, with gratitude, traditional territories that each of us are situated on today. I respectfully acknowledge that I live, learn, and work within ancestral, traditional, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. Thank you, Creator, and our ancestors for sharing your ways of being, knowing and relating to each other and to these lands, for providing us with protectors of each of these teachings, living at home and away from home, those who are protecting, restoring, preserving the medicines, animals, waterways, languages, and ceremonies to ensure their continued vibrancies. Finally, yet importantly, I would like to acknowledge the future generations, those who will be beneficiaries of the decisions that we make today. May we ground our actions in the promotion of cultural safety and humility, equality, and relational accountability so we can all live with integrity while helping others thrive within these teachings. Hela, OTM. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you for getting us started in a good way. So hopefully everybody can see me now and hear me. So as Rama said, my name is Rebecca Sovdi. Jessica's going to introduce herself a little bit further later in the presentation when she starts talking. But just want to really express my gratitude for being here today, for being given this platform and opportunity to share with you today. I also want to start with my own territory acknowledgement. So I have the honor of living, working, and playing on unceded traditional territory of the Cowichan people on Vancouver Island, which is a recent move for me, and I'm just incredibly privileged to live here and to explore and get to know a new area of these lands. I also want to start out with some other acknowledgements here before we get started. So I want to talk a little bit about my own personal privilege and what brings me here. So I am a white settler. I'm a third-generation Canadian, and I have German, French, and Dutch ancestry, and I grew up in the province of Saskatchewan. So for this reason, I feel that I must acknowledge that my white privilege is present, and that I have personally benefited from the colonization of these lands. I also want to acknowledge that I live in a thin body. I've never experienced food insecurity in my lifetime, and I do not live with diabetes. So my perspectives on this topic cannot be backed by personal experiences. Some of the other acknowledgements that we want to make sure we share today is that, you know, I see so many familiar names on the participant list here today, and many that I don't know, and acknowledge that there may be many of you out there that know more about the research on these concepts than we do, and that we are not researchers, nor are we able to review all of the relevant research in the areas of what we're talking about. Really, we're just sort of brushing upon them. But we also want to acknowledge that most research methodologies are inherently colonial, and that has an impact on the way that they are presented. We want to acknowledge that what we're talking about today is a complicated topic, that the relationships between individuals and historical experiences and the physiological manifestations of chronic disease are not straightforward or causal. We especially want to acknowledge that while some of the information in this webinar may be difficult to hear, as we all personally reflect upon Canadian history and the past and current experiences of Indigenous people in Canada today, that we are not trying to place blame or point fingers on individuals, but rather we're trying to positively impact systems change and ultimately improve the lives of people at risk for or living with diabetes and their family. So what have we brought you here today to talk about? Our hope is that you leave this webinar today with a curious mind, and one that is willing to challenge some of what you've previously heard are the risks for diabetes among Indigenous people in Canada. We're going to brush upon some of the historical context that has led to the current and intergenerational trauma and stress that the First Peoples of Canada experience today. We're also going to discuss some of the current context and understanding that society seems to have about the risks for type 2 diabetes. We're going to dive down a little deeper to the cellular level and talk about how the physiology behind diabetes and what role stress plays within that. Most importantly, we're going to hear Jessica's story because her personal journey with diabetes and experiences in the healthcare system is an extremely powerful change maker. And then lastly, we will leave you with some key messages regarding how you can be a better ally and change agent within the role that you play in the health system and beyond, as well as provide you with some suggestions for further learning, because learning about cultural safety and humility is a lifelong process. To get us started, we're going to do 2 questions. So the first question is going to be a reflection question. I'm going to read the question aloud and then allow you a moment to just reflect and think. So that will be a few moments of silence. And then the second question is going to be a participation question. So let's get started with the reflection question. What do you know and understand about Indigenous people's experience in health and healthcare in Canada? For the whiteboard questions, we're going to ask you to participate again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the question, and then I'm going to pass control over to Shauna, who's going to put up a whiteboard, and we'll allow a couple of minutes of input, and then we will continue on with the presentation. So the question is, what have you seen, heard, or done that has improved your understanding of these experiences? So over to you, Shauna.
And I'll need to pass that over to Raman because of our technical issues, unfortunately.
Right, of course.
To prompt her.
Raman, does that work? It's great to see people using the stamp option because it allows you to just check off something that's already there, so that's perfect. Lots of participation, it's really appreciated. Beautiful, there's a book suggestion by someone. Look at Robin's agile skills in the background there, moving things around.
I will definitely save this and we can even share it with the group afterwards.
That's perfect. Because we do, at the end, we are also sharing a couple of ideas, but it has nowhere near this depth. Allow just a couple more seconds.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hi, I wasn't able to do the Zoom part, but I phoned in. I'm just wondering, is this going to be available through like PDF or something that we can get it from a link somewhere?
Definitely.
Perfect.
Definitely. We'll be sending out a follow-up email.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, I think we're going to have to wrap that up and move on so we have enough time.
Yeah.
But thanks so much, Roman. And so I will. Okay, perfect. There. Okay, perfect. So thank you so much for your contributions, and hopefully you also gained some ideas about additional ways that you can improve your understanding beyond this webinar. Now, I want to dive into the content a little bit by talking about how society, including Diabetes Canada, currently frames the risk that Black, Indigenous, and people of color have for diabetes. So Chapter 5 of the Diabetes Canada Clinical Practice Guidelines states that certain ethnic groups, including African, Arab, Asian, Hispanic, Indigenous, and South Asian people, are at very high risk for and have high prevalence of type 2 diabetes. They then go on to state that the reasons for this are multifactorial and include genetic susceptibility, altered fat distribution, and higher prevalence of metabolic syndrome. The Chapter 5 then further goes on to say that lifestyle or healthy behavior interventions would likely prevent or delay the onset of diabetes. This last one is an important point because while there is recognition that the risks are multifactorial, the suggested solution then downplays the complexity by placing both the blame and the responsibility on the individual when it comes to diabetes risk and management. So let's also look at lifetime risk. So recent research published in 2016 by Turin and colleagues aimed to estimate the prevalence of diabetes among First Nations people in Canada. So they stated that a 20-year-old First Nations person has an 80% chance of developing diabetes in their lifetime. And this will be an important later in the presentation when we talk about ways to make a difference in terms of prevention and what you can do within your role. Before diving further into the basis behind these risks, let's also lay some foundation by defining a few words that Jessica and I will be using during our presentation. Words that are frequently used, but not always clearly understood. So race is a category of humankind that shares certain distinctive physical traits. And ethnicity is the cultural identity of a person, which can include language, religion, nationality, ancestry, and culture. Both race and ethnicity are social constructs, which are ideas that have been created and accepted by people in society and may change over time. Racism is a belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherently inherent superiority of a particular individual. And then, of course, lately we're hearing a lot about systemic racism, which are policies and practices entrenched in established institutions, which result in the exclusion or promotion of certain groups. There doesn't have to be individual intent of racism necessary to result in systemic racism. And then there's both institutional racism and structural racism. So let's talk about what some of the current thinking of the system is. So current society tends to link higher rates of diabetes among Indigenous Canadians on primarily two things: genetics and behavior. One of those areas has been through the thrifty gene hypothesis, which is a theory that emerged in around 1962 that stated that the ancestors of people who lived during times of feast and famine had metabolic ways of storing food when it was in abundance. But that meant that in modern times, it leads to higher rates of obesity and subsequently diabetes. However, over the past 20 years, this theory has been greatly criticized and disproven in research. Another very common perspective is that diabetes is a behavioral disease or has behavioral risk, meaning that it is primarily poor behaviors and poor choices that put people at risk for diabetes, and that people with diabetes or people at risk for diabetes just need to eat right and exercise, and that will fix all the problems. And on the slide, I say sort of facetiously that it's people just need to be better humans, because at times they're told to just be better, do better, try harder. However, these general ideas of genetics and behaviors as being the driving factors behind diabetes is where we hope to plant a seed of curiosity and hopefully start to challenge a bit about what you've heard previously. In the article pictured on the screen about race and type 2 diabetes, the author points out that the genes that make humans physically different and place us into racial categories is only 0.2% of our genetic material. And by no means is this sentence meant to promote the statement of "I don't see color," but rather to draw linkages to other factors that perpetuate racism and the idea of racial imperfections. As our understanding of genetics has improved, the links between genes and diabetes becomes less certain. The author does stress that genes do matter, however, not in the way that most people think, that diabetes tends to run in families or has family linkages. And while we cannot deny that some groups of people have higher rates of diabetes, let's look beyond race and dive deeper into what may be driving this. So what are the risks beyond race? In 2020, due to the ongoing and frequent injustices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, we are seeing incredible movements to bring more awareness to these deeply rooted issues. Historically and today, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, the racial groups that Diabetes Canada identifies as being the highest risk for type 2 diabetes, all have experienced and continue to experience colonialism and trauma. Colonialism, trauma, and poverty are all significantly more powerful risk factors than race. And I'm highlighting here just a very few examples in research that I was able to find that are linked to this area. And as mentioned, of course, we are not able to present all of the areas. But Cheryl Curry is a researcher out of the University of Alberta, and she looked at racial discrimination and its association with allostatic load. So she showed that experiences of racism and lack of culture impacted the allostatic load of individuals. So the allostatic load is the activation of the fight or flight response of the body, which results in stress hormone release. And we're going to talk more about that in a moment. She also has a paper that looks at the biological impacts of parental residential school attendance on the next generation, and showed again that the offspring of residential school survivors had increased their allostatic load. The work of Gaskin and colleagues looked at the disparities related to diabetes and showed that while Black people did have higher odds than white people, having low income and living in a poor neighborhood increased the odds of diabetes for both groups. So it is an interesting one to look at some of those factors and remove race and look at poverty and location. Cheryl Curry's work also points to some important aspects of epigenetics and how certain genes can be turned on or off, which may put people at risk in future generations. So now I want to take the helicopter down a little bit to, we were up at 25,000 feet, and now we're going to take it down to the cellular level and look at what happens at the physiological level when our bodies are under stress. So when we experience stress, our bodies release cortisol, which is the fight or flight hormone of our body. It tries to warn us that we are in danger. On a short-term basis, this is a good thing because it springs us into action. It triggers glucose release, so we have enough energy to move our body. It decreases inflammation, and it helps to regulate our blood pressure. But that's on a short-term basis. Unfortunately, over time, cortisol also causes insulin resistance and continued release of glucose. Insulin resistance, while not entirely understood, is strongly linked to chronic stress. So chronic stress is identified as one of the primary factors behind it. And the constant release of stress hormones keeps the body in a state where there's insulin resistance and excessive glucose release, which drives insulin production because the body is attempting to regulate blood sugar by sending more insulin. And one of the best examples that we have of the body's ability to be incredible and send the additional insulin that's needed is during pregnancy. When pregnancy hormones really start to increase, the body is able to double or triple the amount of insulin that's released. For a person who is not pregnant and is under chronic stress over years, they may end up in a state of having excess insulin, which leads to hyperinsulinemia, and that triggers inflammation, heart disease, obesity, and cancer, among other things. Over time, this all leads to beta cell fatigue and beta cell failure. And for those that work in diabetes, potentially you've seen this diagram before. So this is sort of what it looks like over the years of an individual's life. So you'll see 0 in the middle. That's 0 is the time at which a person is diagnosed. And the -5 and -10 are the years before that, in which an individual starts to really have a lot of insulin resistance, and Mother Nature incredibly increases the amount of insulin production at a super high amount to exactly match the amount of insulin that's needed. Over time, though, the beta cells start to fail, and that's at the point in time in which a person's blood sugars will really start to show when they're tested. And sadly, if it's beyond that time, start to experience some of those symptoms. And so, before we move on to Jessica's story, I want to leave you to think about how behaviors are not the cause of diabetes or the reason behind poor diabetes management, but rather they are symptoms of so many other complex factors. Experiences currently and over generations of colonialism and racism, compacted by current environmental and living conditions, poverty, food insecurity, and many other things, are leading to these great disparities in health. Now I'm going to pass things over to Jessica.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. I want to start my journey by introducing myself. My name is Jessica Guss. I was born and raised in the Coast Salish territory. I'm Haida on my father's side, from Old Masset village, from the La Rochelle Williams family. I'm Ukrainian on my mother's side, from the Adams and the Chacon families, and an acquired member with Squamish Nation through my husband from the Lewis and Guss families. My daughters are Haida and Quagils from the Smith and Cook families. So thank you for letting me share my journey. I'm an Indigenous person living with type 2 diabetes. I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in early 2008. Up until then, I didn't know there was more than one type of diabetes. I would see commercials, and that's about it. And these were commercials of people who were alcoholics or very elderly, extremely obese. But that's it. It was nothing that I had learned about in school when we talked about nutrition. I only heard about gestational diabetes when I was pregnant with my two daughters. So the complications came when, after my second child, I took a form of birth control that I hadn't taken before, and it really increased certain hormones, decreased some others, and I experienced some really bad side effects from that. Within 12, 13 months, I gained close to 100 pounds. Finally, at that point, I went to my doctor and I said, there's something wrong. He did some blood work and came back and said, well, you have type 2 diabetes, gave me some pills, said this will help, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. I still didn't know what that really meant. What was the root cause? What do I do? Do I just take this like Tylenol and everything's going to be fine? I started to ask a lot more questions because a year went by, and I ended up in the hospital with a serious kidney infection. I had to get IV treatment. And when I was in the hospital, there was a lot of side talk amongst the medical professionals of how they don't think that I realized how serious type 2 diabetes is, why I have let it go so bad. So finally, I just asked, I'm like, I don't even know what this is. I don't know how this has to do with my kidneys. I don't know any of that information. So it was nice to finally be able to stop holding my breath and say, what is wrong with me? So what happened from there? Unfortunately, in my early learning experience, I experienced a lot of shaming and a lot of racism. Part of my process was in order to get my glucose monitor, it was mandatory to attend a workshop at a local community clinic where there's a dietitian and a few, I think, some nurses and community nurses. We were all given like the Canadian Nutrition Guide, and I felt it was very overwhelming for me. I opened this book and I didn't see anything that reflected stuff that is in my life and in my community. I would talk about traditional foods, and that's where I experienced the racism. And it was, no, you don't eat those foods. You know, that's why you are the way you are. And the other part, for the shaming, it was hard for people to believe that, well, you know, I'm not the one that is cooking. I'm not the one buying groceries. I'm the one working and taking care of my children. And there was so much finger pointing and blame, and I was just humiliated. So I went back to my old teachings that I grew up, where you don't push back, you don't question authority, and medical personnel were in that category of people of authority. You just let it ride and let it happen. So I kept getting kidney infections. I stopped asking questions. I was charged fees for not showing up to the workshop anymore. I didn't get my glucose monitor. Finally, within the community, I found some other people who have had the same experiences but had glucose monitors. There was a lot of similar experience in my community, both living on reserve and off reserve, that nobody wanted to talk about it. It was like a bad disease, and you should be ashamed and embarrassed that you caused this. And finally, I just, after ending up in the hospital again and over again with kidney infections, I realized that I needed to self-advocate, and that it was about educating others in Indigenous ways of living on and off reserve, and what does traditional food mean? What is it like to be an Indigenous person on or off reserve, having medical complications and having access? What have my barriers been? My tipping point was when I looked around and I saw my neighbors and my elders, and I wouldn't see them for a while, and I would wonder. And when I would find out that they were having complications with diabetes, that's when I knew I had to stand up and I had to help my elders. And by doing that, I'm also helping myself. And that was the biggest thing that drove me to want to share my story, is what does it mean to support an Indigenous person with type 2 diabetes who is self-determined? And for me, the biggest thing is building a trusting relationship. It's a huge part of the success part of mine and others' journeys, is having that trust and investing in that, building that trusting relationship, especially for Indigenous people who have been let down by the past and the current healthcare practices and the systemic racism. Providing a culturally safe environment will help individuals feel safe, and in return, being more receptive to treatment and what those changes might look like. Include your Indigenous people in their treatment plan. That was a huge part for me, was being able to feel like I finally have control of my health. I don't want to take this medication anymore because it really makes me sick. Is there another option? this one hurts. I don't want to poke my finger 5 times a day. It's huge to be able to have that feeling of having, being empowered and being supported and not shamed, to be able to be a part of your wellness plan. Another part for me is also going beyond the individual and acknowledging that education needs to be brought into the community as well. As Indigenous people, we hurt together, we heal together. And for education to go out, take a look at this information. This is what it means. Here's some signs and symptoms. Perhaps somebody will recognize that in a loved one. Perhaps these are the things that should or shouldn't be served at a community event. Bringing tradition back, bringing ceremony back, being a part of someone else's wellness journey, and just involving everybody and acknowledging that their traditional approaches have shown to be a greater success for someone's wellness plan. So those are the main things that I really wanted to share with healthcare providers in how to support an Indigenous person living with type 2 diabetes. So thank you, everybody, for letting me share my journey with you today.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It's been such an incredible honor to go through this journey with you for this webinar, and I just so much appreciate you being here today and taking the opportunity to share your story. So thank you. So we are almost done. We're just going to wrap up here. All I wanted to do was just leave you with a few take-home messages based on some of the things that Jessica said, although I don't feel like I've captured them all. But what role can you play? So supporting self-determination, being an ally and an equal, not the expert. Despite that many health professionals are taught and understand that that's their role, is to be the expert, we can be an equal. Not to make assumptions about people, but rather to ask respectful questions and allow an opportunity to build relationships. To continue to work to understand how the experiences of an individual or an entire race are linked to the conditions that we often frame as behavioral. To consider that the most important things, and lastly, to consider one of the most important things that we can do to prevent diabetes today and for future generations is to decolonize and address racism within the healthcare system. For some further reading, I'm just highlighting just a handful of people that I look to, and I know many others do. So Dr. Charlotte Lobby, Dr. Malcolm King, and Dr. Margot Greenwood are all BC-based, incredible people. So you can check out their work. And then we also, on the First Nations Health Authority website under cultural safety, have a webinar series that's a few years old. And we are continuing to do work in this area, but it is worth checking out. So before we turn it over to Raman for some questions for the Q&A period, I'm going to leave you with these 2 questions for reflection. How do you think the Canadian narrative and history impacts the Indigenous experiences in the healthcare system today? And do you think that your current diabetes resources, tools, or approaches could benefit from adaptation to better support Indigenous Canadians in their diabetes journey? And to the last point, I'll say that if you do, we'd be happy to work alongside you to do that. So thank you, Haichika.
Thank you so much. I think, Jessica, you're probably seeing the comments in the chat around just the gratitude towards your story and being here today and sharing. And Rebecca, thank you so much. Like I said, it's been such a pleasure the last couple of weeks planning with you guys. And yeah, wow, what a inspiring session. Like you said, Rebecca, I think you said this, it's a lifelong journey. So just having these conversations and continuing to have these conversations are so important. Okay, I'm gonna check. No questions in the chat as of yet. I'll just remind you guys, if you do have any questions, you could pop it into the chat. You can also raise your hand or unmute your line to ask. Any comments, going back to our group agreements, this is a space for curiosity. We have some questions for reflection. It's a space to share, just as Jessica kind of laid the groundwork for. Yeah, so I just want to say that, and then I will also ask Shauna to pop on a whiteboard. So again, you can go to view options at the top, annotate, and then pull up your text tool and write any kind of question, any reflection, anything you want to share with the group. I will remind you, just in terms of just feeling safe and comfortable in this space, when you type on the screen, your name is not attached to that. You could post anything, any emotion you're feeling or any reflection or question. We're also going to pop on Rebecca and Jessica's contact information, so their emails are there if you do think of a question afterwards.
Sorry to interrupt, Raman, but I just noticed my last name is spelled wrong in the email on the screen that Shauna just put, so just want to make sure it's the right one.
Great catch, thank you. Okay, so we do have a question. You mentioned you will support reforming current diabetes education. How can we contact you for that support? So I think the contact information is there. Do either of you want to elaborate on that? Reforming current diabetes education and getting support for that.
I think really it's one of the roles that the First Nations Health Authority can play in this work. As you know, whether it be somebody that works for a health authority, somebody working privately, somebody working in research, certainly we'd be happy to work alongside others as they look at those tools. And so, I mean, nothing specific at this point in time, but we're just we would be thrilled to do that.
Awesome. Okay, I don't know, we might have something else in the chat, just reflections here. I continually wonder how to break down the barriers to this kind of change when it is so heavily influenced by big industry. Yes, I would put a check mark beside that. Improving health for Indigenous peoples will improve health for everyone. Yes. And Shauna will probably move the text to the other slide. This is great. So I'm just going to go in order that I saw them come up. Suggestion, in my area of diabetes among the Indigenous population is very prevalent. I think diabetic foot clinic is required. That's really good thought. And then some contact information there for someone. How can we support diabetes care beyond revising documents, patent handouts, while advocating for decolonization and racism? Great question. Heavy question, but a great question. Any thoughts there? What can we do beyond documents and handouts?
Yeah, for sure. I think some of the concepts that we talked about, supporting self-determination, becoming an ally, working towards equality within as a healthcare provider. So diving deeper into each of those aspects and thinking about how that impacts one's practice and how they can reflect upon. So for example, if an individual doesn't return for a follow-up appointment, let's not look at it as a failure of the individual. Let's reflect upon perhaps what we did as a health professional to potentially influence their not returning, and think about how we can continuously improve. Yeah, Jessica, do you have other things to add to that question?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Thank you for bringing that forward. For me, it definitely goes for the awareness of cultural safety and humility. It starts with me, it starts with you, and having that self-assessment in your individual awareness of cultural, what is culturally safe, and then establishing that relationship with the individual and the community in a culturally safe way. I feel that even introducing culturally safe practices as well. Again, if my contact information is there, First Nations Health Authority has some really great tools with working with First Nations individuals and communities around cultural safety and humility and some standards. So feel free to contact me and I can link you with that as well. But I definitely feel that establishing that relationship with that individual and the community is a great first step at setting a new standard.
Amazing, yeah. Thank you both. There's a lot of comments and questions, and I so appreciate everyone's participation and curiosity. We're not going to leave these questions hanging. We're going to kind of bookmark them, and we'll ask Jessica and Rebecca to answer them in an email and provide. I know there's one around resources and a couple stamps beside that, so I know which ones I will flag for our amazing presenters today. I'm conscious of time, so I am going to jump back to our presentation and close off. Again, thank you so much, and I apologize that we didn't get to all the questions. So I'm going to jump right to thank you because we're a couple minutes out. So I guess I just want to start by saying thank you first to all of our attendees. I know it's, like I said, middle of summer and kind of a crazy summer at that. So thank you for joining us today. I know 60 minutes, everyone's super busy. And then to our amazing guests, our inspiring guests, our courageous guests, thank you, Jessica and Rebecca. That was so great. A huge highlight for me, and what a great way to kick off our webinar series leading up to the Type 2 Diabetes Dialogue, where this conversation will continue. As always, we love feedback. As I said, it's the first of a series, so Shauna is going to post our evaluation survey into the chat. If you could take a couple minutes, let us know what went great for you, what didn't work for you, because it will be considered into future sessions. And then, you know, this is the dialogue, and then we work together and continue working together. So part of that working together comes down to our Type 2 Diabetes Network, which we are hoping to bring a lot of these conversations and move them to action. So if you'd like to learn more about that, Shauna is going to pop in a link to our Type 2 Diabetes Network as well. With that, I just want to thank everyone for attending, and I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your summer. Thank you so much. Bye.